Hey, John, thanks very much for coming, and it's great to see you. How are things?
Things are good.
Yeah?
Good morning.
I think John is one of those kind of upbeat guys who always sees the glass as half full if it's half full, right? I mean, if we've got some water in it, you always have an optimistic outlook on what's going on in the markets.
Yes, I think optimistic but realistic at the same time.
Right. So, Cisco, we've known each other for a while, and you know, back in the day, we described Cisco as a router company. Are you a router company today? What is Cisco today, and where is Cisco going to be 5 years from now?
More than fair. Well, when we started, I think we started our company at the same time you joined Fortune, 1984. At that time, there were 1,000 devices connected to the internet, and we thought this was the future. At the time I joined Cisco, we were one product company, a router company. Then we got re-exciting, moved into switching, then moved into telephony. Our peers said we couldn't spell telephony. They were probably right, but we knew how to get 65% market share. We moved into video. But what I'm sharing with you is we were largely a product company. Simple goals, number one or number two in each area, or don't compete. In the last 4 or 5 years in particular, we've moved much more to an outcome-based company, business results outcome. Instead of thinking ourselves in silos, we think horizontally, and this is hard to do, as you know, Andy, where you combine products together. We've got 12 products that we're the number one player in, often with well over 40% market share, 4 where we're the number 2, 2 we're the number 3, but in each of those number 3s, we're gaining share, areas like data center, et cetera, and security. So where we are today is combining these together to produce outcomes and moving to try to become the number one IT company. As you know, most of the goals we've set for the company we've achieved over time, sometimes some bumps along the way. So I'd say completely transformed ourselves, at times disrupted ourselves.
Still, John, 80% of your revenue is non-recurring, right?
Yes.
And obviously the holy grail is to get recurring revenue. I mean, everyone wants that. And that would suggest more of a services company. How do you change that? How do you change that ratio?
Well, 2 things. First of all, Andy, it isn't necessarily a given that you want completely recurring revenue. It just makes your earnings much more predictable and you don't have the bumps along the way. If you look at our profitability over the last 20 years, it's been unequal in the industry. Average growth during the 90s was 60-some%. Average growth over the last 10 years has actually been in profits, 10% plus. However, what we want to do over time is to have more recurring revenue, but not lose that momentum of the hunger of the first orders in terms of direction. So what you do is you move into more areas, software as a service, you move into cloud type capabilities, more services in total. Services is 20-some% of our business today. It will probably at a point in time reach 30%. But I think you'll begin to see us charge more and more how the customers want to buy, and we'll adjust that way, Andy. And I think we've done that well over the years. As business models change, we change.
So is it 50-50? Would that feel better to you?
Oh, if you could get there. Your problem is if you take 10% out of your regular revenues in a year and make them recurring, that means your revenues are down by 10% in a year and you have all the expenses. So it's doing that gradually, and that's what we're doing. A lot more and more coming out of the Internet of Everything, which is the next best big thing in technology, in my opinion. A lot more coming out of software, so it's a gradual approach.
We talked a little bit yesterday. We were talking obviously over the past day or so about that, and Internet of Things, Internet of Everything. And Michael Wolf yesterday had a great presentation. You should see it on his site, Activate.
I will.
And talked about sort of the fallacy of the wired fridge, right? That everyone said everyone's refrigerator is going to be connected to the internet. Just how far can that really go? I mean, because some of it's sort of kind of ludicrous, isn't it?
No. Just to be controversial.
Okay.
It
is your business.
If you watch what happened, we often see the trends 3, 5, sometimes 10 years ahead of our peers. We're customer driven. We focus not on competition, but purely on market transitions. You focus on your competition, you're looking out the rearview mirror. So we started our focus on the Internet of Everything 7 years ago. And our view was from that 1,000 devices connected in 1984 to 13 billion today.
13 billion devices, that includes
today,
cars and phones and
everything. 50 billion by 2020, 500 billion by 2030. This will change every aspect of business. It will change supply chain. And if you think a refrigerator won't be connected, self-serving, problem determination, you will have little chips that will be dropped in agriculture, literally in farmland, and tell you how much water you need to do, what's your fertilizer, etc. This will produce 19 trillion in profits and cost savings in the public and private sector. And while You know, 2 years ago, Andy, I'd have to buy you a drink to get you very excited about it.
Yeah.
Right now, boards of directors are coming to Cisco. If you watch the Consumer Electronics Show, it was the topic, the Internet of Everything. And at Davos, you had leaders such as President Park out of South Korea or President Pena out of Mexico understand this could transform their country. So I actually think this will be 10 to 15 times bigger than the Internet was to date. And I think you're now beginning to see a lot of people move where if I can't see the audience because it's dark out there. How many of you believe the Internet of Everything is going to be the next big movement in technology? How many of you would have said that 2 years ago?
A lot of them.
Now, by the time it's obvious, you have to have already bet and be moving. And that's where I think some people who were critical of that, saying the refrigerator or the car wouldn't be connected. We did refrigerator demos and car demos 10 years ago. We said, this is the way it's going to go. The car will have so many networks in it. This will be how they'll make additional revenue, et cetera. So I think it's just a logical transition. If you listen to your customers, there's going to be more to come. Perhaps the biggest transition, though, Andy, that is different, you and I would go in front of a CEO audience at some of your forums, and we'd say IT is going to determine your future. And the CEOs go, yeah, right. And then you watch them over time begin to say IT will enable your future.
Right.
And they begin to nod a little bit. Now you can watch the new CEOs at Walmart, at Allstate, or even people like myself that have been around, Ken Chenault at American Express. They describe themselves as a technology company first, specializing in finance or insurance or retail. And the point that I'm making is you're about to see a major transition where technology finally has the ease of use, the integration that can really change the way that we do our business, everything from supply chain to customer interface to our peers. So perhaps this next frontier might surprise a lot of people, both in terms of the opportunity and how once an elbow hits, which you've all seen over the years, it always takes too long to get there, but when it hits, it really gets exciting.
Can mobile first or the mobile world be the most important trend and the Internet of Everything be the most important trend at the same time?
Oh, I think it's even wider than that, Andy. If you watch what enables the Internet of Everything, it's the cloud,
right.
It's mobile, it's security,
okay, fair
it's
enough.
absolutely collaboration. It's how you combine these in what we call architectures. So the way we're going to compete against a lot of our peers is we'll tie together these products as platforms, applications, infrastructure with services, and we'll produce outcomes. And we'll be able to do it at much lower operating expense than our peers if we do our job right and have a much higher probability of good results. That allows us to keep our margins. So I think mobility is just one of the enablers of the Internet of Everything.
All right, so if you used to just be a router and switch company, sort of looking in the rearview mirror, which I know you don't like to do, you're looking forward, then who are Cisco's new competitors? And I want you to name names.
Sure.
In other words, who are you really going to be competing against 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, so this is important. You focus on the market transitions that are occurring, and then you use the competitors purely as a way of keeping score. So 3.5 years ago at the Wells Fargo conference, when they asked, we moved into the data center, and our peers like HP said we'd be out of the data center in a year, and we'd have no success. And I can't miss this opportunity. We now are the #1 blade server across the US with 41% market share. HP's at 35% market share. Point that I'm making is we got a transition in the market. We identified it well, and it wasn't about servers. It was servers with storage coming together with the network with a common management and security. And in a market that is flat, we're growing 39%. Now, to your question about competition, at that Wells Fargo conference, they were challenging us saying, well, how are you going to compete against IBM and HP and Dell, et cetera, all great companies, great leadership. And I said, that's the first phase. We've either already well on our way to winning that when we've got a bigger problem. Our competitors of the future will be white label, bare metal, just open source software thrown right on top. And that's where we had to move to architectures, how you have common policy, common application management, something we call application-centric infrastructure, how you combine compute and the network and security in ways that others do not. And that allows you to do this with a much quicker time to market for your customers, much lower operating expenses as opposed to focus on CapEx and differentiation. So our competitors of the future will be a whole new generation of players. I think you're going to see the top, let's say 5 or 6 high-tech players of today. Probably only 2 or 3 of us exist in a meaningful way in as quick as 5 years. It's going to be.
So you're talking about those big enterprise names that you just named.
The big enterprise names, including ourselves. If we don't disrupt ourselves, if we don't have the courage to change, if we don't change before the market forces us to, we'll get left behind. You all have seen the data. You know, in the Fortune 500, what, 24% of them existed in 25 years ago? You think that's fast. You're now seeing this on steroids. Pace of change squared. A third of the companies that are major enterprise companies today will be all that exist in a meaningful way in 20 years. It's going to be brutal, it's going to be fast, and this is where technology can not just enable, I think more and more companies will think of themselves as technology companies first.
Now, you are such a classic legacy enterprise company. The consumerization of IT, does Cisco participate in that? I mean, you did buy a consumer product and then shut it down, the phone, the flip camera, right? And so do you guys not play in that space at all?
Well, I think the one thing that we are very disciplined on as a company, we never enter markets where we can't be number one or number two, with a minimum of 40% market share with sustainable differentiation. The window was open for us to play in the consumer as data, voice, video came together and in the home. We made a good run at it. We missed our window. And this is where you've got to have the courage to take good business risks, because if you don't, you never win. And when you see a player, and Apple did an amazing job. When Steve Jobs held up the flip and said, boy, this is a great product, my team said, isn't that good? And I said, no, watch what comes next. He said, we're going to give you something close to this for free. And when you miss a transition, you have to then say, what are you going to do to have sustainable differentiation? So we will not be in the consumer-to-consumer market, but we absolutely will be in business-to-consumer, partnering with the service providers, the cable companies, the over-the-top players, the social media companies, to come to that consumer with unique technology where almost everything, Andy, is going to be enabled by the network. All those transitions you talked about are network-centric. We're just trying to do a good job of staying in the middle and making a difference.
Let me ask you about the NSA. You wrote a letter to President Obama. I have a copy of it here, where you said that it appeared that someone was monkeying around with a Cisco device. Did you ever get to the bottom of that? Was that in fact a Cisco device that someone was messing around with? And did you ever get a response from President Obama?
Well, first of all, when you deal with government leaders, if you can't talk very candidly as you go around the world, you don't get the candid responses. So I'm not going to comment about the feedback from the White House. What I will comment is that I think everyone in the world, regardless which country you're in, realizes the importance of security and supply chain predictability. And so we need, as I called for in that letter, some rules of the road, some standard of conduct that governments agree on doing. And that our ability not to, it's nice to figure out how did you get where you are, but that's looking at your rearview vision mirror. What you want to say is how do we go forward on a global basis so as to assure the security of supply chains, so as to assure the security as we as citizens around the world have right to our own privacy and know if information is being shared or not. And I think this is something the government leaders really have to deal with very directly, and I think you will see them deal with that over the next 1 to 2 years. I think they have to.
So do you feel more comfortable with the United States position vis-a-vis your ability to sell product overseas?
I think we have a ways to go, as every country does. And the key point here is this is an issue for every country. It's not unique to the U.S. The issues are the same in Asia and the same in Europe. And so the key is going back to those standards of conduct that we all agree upon. Do I feel comfortable with our ability to sell on a global basis? Yes, I do.
Okay, so John, you've been CEO, I guess it will be 20 years in January of next year, correct? And you're going to be turning 65 soon in this August. So those are two pretty big milestones. I'm going to ask you a pretty obvious question.
And you already know my answer.
What about succession? Who's going to be, when are you going to step down as the CEO of Cisco, and who's the next CEO going to be?
Sure. The next time you hear us talk about succession and that event will be when we announce it, Andy. And we're not going to make any comments prior to that time.
So you're the CEO for now, and until you guys
say
otherwise. Okay, yes. Fair enough. Questions from the audience for John Chambers, the Chief Executive Officer of Cisco. We've got something back here. We've got someone over here.
Now this is where it's a lot easier to walk off stage, walk up to the person asking the question, look them in the eyes,
this is where you'd like to get up
a little bit of emotional conduct.
Phil Donahue. All right. Not going to let you do that.
Yeah.
Hi, Nick Milani with Herman Miller. You talked about data security and driving in the letter. How is Cisco approaching that component as part of as you are leaders in the Internet of Things? I mean, is that policy as important as the product itself?
Without security, you're going to slow the growth of all the key industries. And I realized about 3 or 4 years ago, when one of my peers was up on stage getting grilled by, I forget who it was, and about security, and they said, that's Chambers' problem at Cisco. And I was sitting in the room and turned, but he was right. He basically said, until you can connect everything that comes to bear from using today's world, the cloud all the way down to the end user device, with a common security architecture and policy, it's going to be difficult to really have something that you can really have with high confidence secure on. So we've decided to try to become the #1 security company. You saw us when we made that statement 15 months ago. Much like we said we'd become #1 in telephony, everybody kind of snickered a little bit. Well, if you watch what we've done with our acquisitions in that time period and how well they've taken off with SourceFair and our other moves, we're going to tie together each of these with an architectural approach that will have different security elements at every node in the network, from the data center all the way to the end user device. It will be software and hardware, a lot of it recurring revenue, to your point, Andy, the question you asked earlier. But to answer your question very directly, the network has to play the key role here. I think most people realize that. We'll put that into both our regular hardware, our software, our custom ASICs, merchant ASICs, and we'll tie it together as the move we're going to try to make. Key takeaway, security is a must as we move forward in many of these new areas, especially if every company, every government, every healthcare system becomes a technology company first and, quote, a individual functional company second.
John, I want to put your feet to the fire just one more time on this, and I'd love it if you could answer yes, no, or no comment.
Yeah.
The reports included a photograph purportedly showing a Cisco product being modified.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to the bottom of that? Was that a Cisco product being modified? Yes, no, or no comment?
I don't know.
So
what you are seeing is if there'd been an HP product there or a Huawei product, I probably wouldn't have written the letter to the president. So it was purely a box that was on the stage.
Fair enough. Okay. Other questions for John? Got one right here.
John,
Sure.
I admire your discipline about saying this is our goal and we're going to close things down and have the courage to move quickly if we're not achieving our overall corporate objectives.
Now, whenever you get this, you're about to get a real tough question right behind it.
Right. And can you identify yourself, please?
Dan Levitan from Mavron.
Right.
Hey, Dan.
Just, if you don't want to share specifics, share generalities. How does a big company like Cisco spend $500 million on an acquisition and then shut it down so quickly?
The answer, this is where you have to be willing to disrupt yourself. Remember, in many people's minds, we redefined innovation by doing it yourself, which was the traditional way, by acquiring, which in 1993, when we did our first acquisition, our stock went down, crescendo. And remember, I paid $92 million for a company that had a couple million in revenue. Stock went down badly that day. That's $13 billion in revenues today with great gross margins. Secondly, when you make disruptive moves, you have to be realistic. And we communicated to the market, to our customers, and to our shareholders that 90% of acquisitions fail in our industry. If you measure, did you keep the engineers? Did you gain profitable market share after that? Did you expand your goals, et cetera? Our hit rate has been probably 2/3 of them hit or exceed what we told our board of directors we'd do during the first couple years. And so we tell them up front, 1/3's going to miss. Now, your key is to have the courage to disrupt yourself and the market, and the courage when that 1/3 comes along, either to correct it quickly or to cut it and move. And that's what leadership's about. Innovation, anybody that thinks that each time you try to become #1 or #2 in each product area, you're going to be successful, especially on your first go-around, isn't the right approach. So I think you would be hard-pressed to say any other major high-tech company in my segments of the industry that is #1 or #2 in more than 2 to 3 product areas. And here we are in 18. I think the results kind of speak for itself. It doesn't mean I wouldn't like to avoid the ones that miss. If we knew they were going to miss, we wouldn't have done them. The key issue is, do we have the courage to cut and switch when we need to?
Great.
Does that make sense to you?
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. I'm sorry. But thank you, John, very much for coming. And please join me in thanking John Chambers, CEO of Cisco Systems.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Right.
So I think I'm over there.
Let's go out this way.